Mr. Masuro Emoto. Mr. Emoto became terribly interested in the molecular structure of water and what affects it. Now, water is the most receptive of the four elements. Mr. Emoto thought perhaps it would respond to non-physical events. So he set up a series of studies, applied mental stimuli, and photographed it with a microscope.
For
one sample of water, we drop about 0.5 cc's onto each 50. And we take the water with information and do the same procedure just described. We take those before and after photographs and compare the differences. When we projected the feeling of love and thanks to water, times like this, I think water is at peace.
Next series of pictures, Mr. Emoto printed out words, taped them to bottles of distilled water, and left them out overnight. This first photograph is a picture of the pure distilled water, just the essence of itself. These subsequent photographs, as you can see, are each different. This is the chi of love. And we move along here to thank you. And you can see where he taped that to this bottle here. But if you read Japanese, you already knew that. Now, Mr. Emoto speaks of the thought or intent being the driving force in all of this. The science of how that actually affects the molecules is unknown, except to the water molecules, of course. And it's really fascinating when you keep in mind that 90% of our bodies are water.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? If thoughts can do that to water, imagine what our thoughts can do to us.
Recently, there was the huge tsunami that happened in the ocean, and you wrote that the prayer for that. That was great. Thank you. I've noticed that when something like that happens, it seems like people from around the world, suddenly there's this outpouring of support and help. There's something about helping on the world level that seems to uplift everyone. What do you make of that?
やはりその過去もう10年ぐらいの間にいろんなところで実験を
Through my 10 years of research, I have been visually sending the message to people all over the world that people's prayers and thoughts can affect reality no matter where they are.
皆さんに届けられています。 でそういうような
So because this idea had already been accepted by many in the world, people probably thought, oh, so that's how it works. If we try, our energy can reach there. Then we should all pray.
祈ろうというようなことになったんではないかと思いますね。そしてまたそれが
And this is the reason why there are no great outbreaks of infectious disease as a result of the tsunami disaster.
こういうような積み重ねによってやはり人々はもう
With the repetition of similar actions, people may start regaining faith in prayers.
していくようになるんではないだろうか。従いまして
Therefore, in other words, there may be more disasters, be it natural or man-made, that would create more casualties along the way.
的にも襲ってくるでしょうけれども、いろいろな人たちが
Through these experiences, more people may be able to perceive these problems as their own, that they are all responsible as well.
自分のこととして考えるようになっていくんではないだろうかというふうに思います。
We really learn to love that these particular problems of separateness would just disappear, like a filmy mist when the morning sun comes about.
So we do the O.J. Simpson thing, and we have an amazing result. A number of years go by, and more of us are getting interested in this thing, this kind of idea of taking random number generators and seeing whether we can detect the world reacting to it. So an unhappy event occurred where Princess Di died in an accident. And somewhat similar to the O.J. thing, everyone knew a week in advance that there was going to be a live broadcast of the funeral. And this was such a shock around the world that we knew that it would probably attract something like 1 billion viewers live. So in this case, we had 12 colleagues, each of whom had a similar kind of random number generator around the world. And we all got together and recorded data before, during, and after the funeral. And came up with a formal test to see whether or not there was a deviation in the generators. And as it turned out, there was a significant deviation among all of these generators around the world. Another year or so goes by, and we start thinking, these one-shot experiments are interesting, but we're going to miss things that happen spontaneously. Like, it would have been interesting to know what would have happened when the first news broadcast went out that Princess Di had died. So this generated the notion of the Global Consciousness Project, which was headed by Roger Nelson at Princeton. And the idea is to take random number generators, locate them around the world, run them 24 hours a day, and every 5 minutes send all the data up to a single web server at Princeton. So we have a continuous record, and we've had it now for 8 years, a continuous record of randomness from around the world. We have data now for 2 kinds of events. 2 basic types of events. We have planned events like Y2K. It was, again, a stroke of midnight where everyone was going to be paying attention in each time zone. We also have spontaneous events like 9/11 that weren't planned. But we're able to look at all of them now in terms of what happened to this randomness, this physical measure of randomness around the world, when a lot of minds suddenly became focused on something. And the short story of this is we have hundreds of events now, both planned and unplanned, and it is very clear that overall the randomness is not as random as it ought to be, by theory, when these events are occurring. Large-scale events that attract a lot of attention create a certain mental coherence, which seems to be reflected in what's going on in random generators around the world. So that's one thing of interest. The second thing of interest is, and we noticed this first when 9/11 occurred, we analyzed it very closely to see what was happening. There were 37 random generators running that day. If you go into the data and you look at it over the course of the day, 9/11, you find a very unusual statistical structure in the data. You find a 6 standard deviation change. It's as though, if you think about the results of this experiment like a bell shape, we're constantly recreating a bell-shaped curve. That's what the statistics look like. And we're interested in, how does the bell ring? How does it swing? How does it vibrate over time? That's the way a way of thinking about the statistic. On 9/11, the bell rang extremely loud. It swung hard in one direction and it swung hard in the other direction, basically. And then we thought, well, that's unusual. So we compared it to other days. We started comparing it to more and more days around 9/11, and it turns out that 9/11, within the year 2001, was the loudest ringing of the bell. Well, it was probably also the most focused day of attention for 2001 and maybe since then. The other thing that was interesting is that the bell started to swing before 8:30 in the morning Eastern Time. It began to swing noticeably before the events unfolded, which suggested something like a premonition. There was something beginning to build statistically that then basically exploded at when the events unraveled, but something was a premonition.
One of the most interesting experiments with random event generators occurred when it was really out of time. Some of the Princeton investigators and some of the other ones decided that they would try to see whether or not you could affect a random machine after it had run. So they converted it, instead of having a computer with a visual screen, they had a computerized situation that was audio tapes. And they had it with clicks in the left ear and clicks in the right ear. And they already played this with nobody listening to it, so that it already ran. They put that in a vault, and they then gave the tape, the already run tape, to a participant and said, take it home, I want you to listen to it, and I want you to make more left ear clicks than right ear clicks with it. Send your intention to it. So the person did. They handed back the tape, and they played it, and lo and behold, and they played the one in the vault too, and they discovered that they were both the same, and they both had more left clicks than right clicks. So what was going on here? Well, it wasn't as though the person who was the participant had actually affected it at the moment he was listening to it. His thoughts and his attention had moved back down the timeline and affected it at the moment it was generated.
Most people don't affect reality in a consistent, substantial way because they don't believe they can.
Cannot believe people who say that none of this is so. None of this is so is relative to them and their following. What would you rather choose? That it isn't so, or it is so? And who bags the truth? Who holds the bag of truth? Someone out there that's saying this is impossible, or somebody out there that said absolutely is? Who holds the bag of truth? We do.
I like the placebo effect because it has to do with a person's acceptance. It's really what it's about. For example, they took these group of people that had Parkinson's disease, and in Parkinson's disease, there's a problem in the brain with making dopamine. There's a little nuclei called a substantia nigra that stops making dopamine. And of course, when there's no dopamine, the body starts to respond differently. We have musculoskeletal problems. We have tremors, and what's called intention tremors, or we have, foot shuffling, or we have pill rolling. And these are muscular actions that supersede our voluntary control. We can't control those. So they took a group of people that had Parkinson's disease, and they said to them, now listen, we have this injection. It's going to make you better. Well, 50% of the people that got the injection all of a sudden lost all their motor dysfunction. In other words, they weren't pill rolling, they weren't shuffling their feet anymore, they didn't have intention tremors when they were grabbing for objects. So the doctor said, well, that's a great example of a placebo, it's all in your mind. But when they checked the dopamine levels that were produced in the brain, the interesting thing that happened was that the brain started making dopamine because they accepted that they were well. In other words, their thought that they were well allowed them to begin to be well. And if you're being well in the quantum field, the observer has to supply the chemistry to match who you're being.
The issue of whether we do a detailed statement of intention, or if we do it in such a way that we leave it open for the universe to find a way to do it. Generally, it's the latter. Certainly for the water, it's the latter. For example, one of the 4 sitters, meditators, thinks of it when the intention is read and it's to increase the pH. The person visualizes a thermometer and it's going up. That's it. Okay, so each uses its own visualization. But in this particular case, then, it's just a pure intention, and the intention seems to act like a true thermodynamic potential. every bit as much as pressure and temperature, and the universe, that thermodynamic driving force, if you'll call it that, of intention, then acts on the available processes. And those processes do their thing, and the effect happens.
Well, we do create our own reality all the time, have always done so. But the type of reality that we create, with all its limitations and its suffering, disease, lack, accidents, vicissitudes of various kinds, that mirrors the consciousness that we express through. So we are creating our own reality every day, though we find that very hard to accept. There's nothing more exquisitely pleasant than to blame somebody else for the way we are. It's her fault or his fault, it's the system, it's God, it's my parents, it's the state, whatever. But in quantum physics, we're brought back to reality. Whatever way we observe the world around us is what comes back to us. And the reason why my life, for instance, is so lacking in joy and happiness and fulfillment is because my focus is lacking in those same things exactly. Now, what we're talking about here in creating our own reality is not something gilly like that. We're talking about what is deeply and fully accepted in my being about life. That slowly manifests itself every day. So if I go into a grocery store and I want to manifest a $100 bill to pay for my groceries, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that's much more slow to come into manifestation. But certainly the life that we experience, if we're victims, we should ask ourselves, have I a victim mentality? If I'm continually meeting misfortunes and accidents and tragedies, maybe it's because my mentality is basically attuned to accepting that this is the way life is, and so it happens. Now, why can I not achieve those things? Fundamentally through lack of focus.
The average person loses their attention span every 6 to 10 seconds per minute.
When one wants to focus intent, you want to be a singleness of mind. That's why some of the old occult teachings teach people to focus on a flame, a match flame, in fact, so that you learn to bring your attention into a very sharp channel so that the energy density becomes greater.
To create something like a $100 bill or a gold coin in my hand demands that I have to have absolute control of my thoughts and absolute acceptance that it will happen. And if we do combine those two things, and they're very difficult to achieve but not at all impossible, then they will happen. Skeptics will laugh and scoff at that, but again, time is on our side. And science, I think, is also on our side because it's showing us more and more that this is, in fact, how reality behaves. It is absolutely attendant upon a thought that is fully and deeply felt and accepted.
The mind is structured in layers, just like the universe is structured in layers, from superficial to profound. And if we use the mind at a very superficial level of ordinary thought, we have very limited power. We can barely move a speck of dust across a tabletop without using our hands. So weak can consciousness be. But at the deepest level of consciousness, consciousness creates universe. Unified field theories endow this universal unified field of consciousness with such creativity that it's constantly effervescing universes, like bubbles from effervescent ginger ale. An uncountable infinity of simultaneously emerging universes. Many of these are duds, they don't last very long, but many of them undergo cosmological inflation, exponential expansion. They spawn galaxies by the trillions.
But we always wonder, then, don't we? When we wish for all of those, to be able to heal with the touch and to raise the dead and to manifest a loaf of bread in our hand. And we always wonder why we can't do that, but we can never ask a question that we don't already know the answer to. And the answer is because we don't believe we could do it, and It interferes with our agenda of our own personal addictions that define us. We have never had enough time to care for anyone else other than our own emotional addictive needs.
Hey, how was the shoot?
So,
Your boss called. He's worried about you. Amanda, I want to thank you for letting me stay here. I know I'm a bit much sometimes and that it's been tough after Bob and all. And you've just been so wonderful. I mean, I make a mess and, well, I clean up afterwards, but it's not really your style.
sometimes I think you make me sane.
Me? The day I make someone sane, they're in trouble. Anyway, I made you something as a thank you gift. Open it. I went through your pictures and picked my favorite ones. And it took me forever because there's so many good ones. This. That's for all the wonderful photos you will be taking. Oh.
I've had a strange day. Thank you.